So at the beginning of 2020, I was traveling in Morocco. I was planning on traveling all the way through Africa, but I ended up visiting some friends at a hostel. I stayed there for some extra time helping out with volunteers. We had a couple people from Germany and a couple people from New Zealand. They were all helping to make the hostel a really nice environment. Lots of people were coming there to go surfing. We went out to the desert. Then the pandemic started, all the guests left. I tried to leave. I went to Marrakesh and tried to get into the airport, and it was absolutely flooded with people trying to get home, and I wasn't able to get a flight. So I ended up stuck in Morocco.
Without warning, like much of Europe, the country suddenly shut down.
Say thousands of others are stranded as well. The airport's filled, and no one giving any answers.
I stayed for some time in the hostel trying to work things out. I went into the mountains for a little bit and camped with some people that were living there. I went to an animal shelter because the animal shelter was depending entirely on volunteers from Europe and from outside of Morocco, excluding a few great volunteers that were from Morocco itself. But generally there were a lot of volunteers that were coming from different places. When the pandemic started and everyone was saying that the borders were going to close and the airports were closing, a lot of people managed to get out of the country. So I was there and helping out with, they had about 200 dogs and a number of cats and some donkeys. I stayed there for a couple of weeks. Eventually I planned to go up to the north of Morocco to try and get onto the ferry up to Europe.
And the quarantine should be coming to an end here. They've extended it twice, but it should be finishing in 10 days from today. And so my plan, I no longer think that I'll be going back to Australia now. Once the quarantine is sort of lifted, I want to go back to Europe. And the tricky part for me is trying to decide how I can do that, because if I book a flight, there's a good chance that it will be cancelled by the time the flight's supposed to be leaving. I think I will be travelling up north and trying to get a boat over to Spain.
So I hitchhiked from the south of Morocco up not very far because the different regions were all restricted and I couldn't get further than a couple of villages north of where I'd been staying. So I ended up living in my tent waiting for the restrictions to end, and they kept getting extended month after month and I became a bit exhausted. I decided in the end to try and hitchhike, even though I had information that it shouldn't be possible for me to get across.
No luck yet. It is very quiet. We will see.
I met a lot of really generous, really friendly people. There was a local man that took me into his place in this little village in the middle of Morocco. He gave me a place to wash and to sleep. He gave me some clothes. And the craziest thing is that we couldn't even communicate on a deep level. He wasn't speaking any English, and I was speaking very basic French, just enough for us to be able to communicate basic things. And I was blown away by how many people like this that I met on my journey that were able to help me in some way. I hitchhiked with a German couple that were living in their camper van. And once I got up to the port, I tried to get onto the ferry to get across to Europe. It wasn't possible, and I was spending a lot of time trying to get information from the visa offices or just trying to find any way to get across. And I slept for a few days in my tent near the port. And then once again, I was blown away by the people's generosity, where in Tangier, someone met me on the street and they offered for me to join them for a meal at their home. And I ended up in their place explaining my situation, and they and their family ended up hosting me in that place for a couple of nights, helped me with the visa situation and finding information, and were eventually able to help me buy a plane ticket to get across to Spain. I think the biggest thing that I learned from my time there in Morocco was, before I visited the country, I was often told that it can be quite a dangerous place, and I'm sure that's true in different areas. Of course, in different parts of the city you have to be careful, and there are people that will try and take advantage of you. But what I didn't realize was just how generous and kind the people can be